Now, still talking election matters, stakeholders in Nigeria have tasked citizens and political leaders to shun acts capable of instigating violence in the upcoming off-cycle elections held in Bayelsa, Imo, and Kogi states. This was as they met in Abuja to appraise events leading up to the polls, where they called on security agencies to guarantee the safety of voters before, during, and after the elections. News Central's Idong Joseph tells us more.
Electoral violence and insecurity over the years have become the major elements that affect the integrity of Nigeria's electoral process, as it deprives citizens the ability to freely participate in the polls. In order to address the challenges of election violence and insecurity ahead of the upcoming Bayelsa, Imo, and Kogi governorship elections, stakeholders have converged on the nation's capital to sensitize citizens and the electoral body on how to avert expected violence. They urge the Independent National Electoral Commission and security agencies to be wary of some of the threats witnessed in the 2023 general elections, some of which include voter oppression, voter intimidation, amongst others.
The risk of voter suppression and intimidation, that is one factor that is likely to generate violence. And it is one tactic that Nigerian politicians use quite often. The second one is the tendency to manipulate the security agencies to serve partisan interests. The third one is what I call logistics failure on the part of INEC. That could also be a precursor for violence.
While maintaining that utterances by political leaders could stir violence during the polls, they urged all stakeholders to shun acts that can instigate violence.
And one of the most immediate things that needs to be done is for these people in power, incumbent governors, to show sensitivity and responsibility to recognize that no life needs to be lost in a contest for political office.
So the governance at the state level to really moderate power and understand that they're holding power as stewards for the people. And it's really about the people, it's not about them. And if you really want to serve, you should be thinking of the people first and not be deploying all manner of violence against your citizens.
What we can all do is everybody to talk to his own family members in Kogi today, in Bayelsa today, and in Imo today. Let peace reign. That's the quickest fix we can all do. Let everybody appeal to his own family member. Everybody that causing crisis belongs to one family.
Though Nigeria's electoral body have assured that all arrangements have been put in place to ensure that the polls are free, fair, and credible, stakeholders are calling on citizens to play their part and avoid acts that can mar the elections.
To join us to speak further about the elections on Saturday, we're joined by Afolabi Adekaiyaoja. He's the lead researcher at Center for Democracy and Development, West Africa. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
All right. I'd like you to share with us your assessment of how ready we are to, conduct the off-cycle elections. We have Kogi, Bayelsa, and Imo. We just spoke with one of the contenders or one of the contestants at the elections, the gubernatorial elections in Kogi State. He's expressed some level of concern. We've also had in Imo State, where there's been also some level of concern, a great level of concern actually, as to insecurity challenges. So from your research, how ready would you say we are to conduct elections in these three areas?
Well, we recently released our pre-election report, and one of the major issues that we've been looking at is that this is really an early referendum, not just on the state of affairs for these different states, but also on the national presidency as well. So we are conducting elections. These are the first ones after the general elections in February and March, and we're really very mindful that this is going to play a very big role in the way that many citizens and also many voters go out to the polls on Saturday to engage. Now, in the three different states, we could not have three more distinct situations, ranging from security, ranging from even the preparedness of the different institutions, not just INEC, but also security agencies as well, but also even the factor of incumbency. So you have Bayelsa and Imo who have incumbent governors who are seeking re-election, but then being very mindful of the fact that these incumbent governors were not the declared candidates on election day 4 years ago. In fact, we're actually looking at a case where, in both cases, they came into office after somebody else had already been announced. And then in Kogi, you have a two-term governor who is now leaving and trying to ensure that he's successor from his own party. So politically, there are very distinct factors that are in play. When it comes to security, also being very mindful of the legacy of the February and March elections, where, in quite a lot of areas, there were issues of voter suppression. There were also concerns about the preparedness and the presence of security forces in different parts of the country. So being very mindful again that in these three states, there have been different issues leading up to the elections. You have open MBA, for example, in Bayelsa. We have quite a number of issues that have been reported in Imo. And then Kogi's size and Kogi's extensive influence, especially in the electoral process, makes it a very, very important battleground state that many parties are going to be actively trying to ensure that they can control. So in a nutshell, it's a really important election for Nigerians to watch and to follow, because it also speaks again to how Nigerians are also responding to the current administration, but also gives another chance for INEC to take the lessons and the learnings that it has gotten from the previous election and apply them here, very quickly and try to set some precedents. I know many Nigerians also been looking at the use of technology in the elections. There have been different statements around the use of IRF and BVAS, and then being very, very clear about how these election results will be transmitted and ensuring that as much as possible, many Nigerians can see the results and then feel more confident about the audits and even the presence of them online. So there are many different factors that play that are actively going to be monitoring during the elections on Saturday.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of expectations on INEC. The challenge that Nigerians have is, when INEC fails, what happens next? And that's, one of the things that always, is heartbreaking. It's also one of the reasons a lot of people need to really be encouraged to get their PVCs because they've lost faith in the whole process and what it produces. But I want you to focus a little bit more on security. A couple of days ago, there was reports from the Inspector General of Police, about how thousands of policemen have been mobilized, to handle the elections in these parts of the state, or these three states. We saw pictures of the army even in Kogi State, but the same Kogi State had the SDP candidate attacked. Policemen were killed in his convoy, amongst other people. Dino Melaye, the PDP candidate, of course, did a press briefing yesterday or the day before, accusing the APC and the Commissioner of Police and the head of the DSS and a couple other people of being behind the attacks and the violence in the state. So obviously not much is different. What are your fears concerning security in these three states?
Well, ultimately, the major concern is that if people don't feel safe going out to vote, then they won't go out to vote at all. And then that will have a very big issue on turnout and also on the way that the leaders and also elected officials will be able to engage with how popular their plans or their proposals were with citizens. If you have a situation where the turnout is significantly less, for example, in a case like Anambra, during the last elections, there was barely 10% of the vote, then you have a case where there are some questions about how popular you can actually say that your plans or your proposals have been with the citizenry. Now, that's on one side. The other side is about how violence can be weaponized by different actors for their own ulterior motives. We already saw during that clip that I played earlier about how there are some concerns about voter suppression. Political parties in Nigeria have historically used that either to ensure that their strongholds come out or to ensure that opposition strongholds do not have as much of a vote as they would normally expect. And that's really a very big role. Now, that in itself would already be a situation, but then when you now factor in the concerns around ethnic representation or even just the different insinuations of now it is this turn of a senatorial or a different group to produce a governor, then these now take on a much more extended influence, because then that now means that these now become targeted attacks, and then that impression, that concern now becomes much more aggravated and could even have a very, very big issue in the way the state is run and the way that the state is governed in the years ahead. So that's a very big concern. We're also going to be looking at how security agencies are even represented, ensuring that there's a very strong gender balance to ensure that citizens can feel comfortable with whoever it is that they see at the polls, so that they can go and engage and interact with them. But ultimately, the most important thing is looking at how these agencies will respond to incumbency. So, like I mentioned earlier, we have 2 incumbent governors who are seeking re-election. We have 1 that's leaving. Now, the concern has always, as usually been, how security agencies tend to respond to instructions or to very tacit directions from the incumbent party or the incumbent governor in any of these particular states. And the concern being that they might now just completely carry out actions that are directly fed by or in support of that particular party, which leads to a very imbalanced and a very partial situation. So the concern really is now trying to make sure that as much as possible, the security agencies are fair and they're also neutral, and they're also very mindful of the important responsibility that they have. We know that there's been some collaboration between INEC, security agencies, and other stakeholders, and it is hoped that the lessons from the previous elections will be brought to bear during these polls.
All right, let's talk about the process for selecting these candidates. Typically, we would see in a number of elections before now, particularly at the presidential level, there'll be a lot of presidential debates. Do you think that this is something that should have been incorporated at the gubernatorial level to sort of encourage participation of voters and sort of give them adequate information as to who these candidates are?
Absolutely. The fact that we didn't have as many debates at the state level is also just a travesty, and this is very sad, a reflection of the way our politics is today. One of the most important factors that we've actually been able to see in recent years is how influential and how important it is to focus on state and governorship elections as well as the presidency. In the February elections, 3 of the major 4 frontrunners were former governors, now President Tinubu, former governor Obi, former governor Kwankwaso, and even Atiku was elected before he was tapped as running mate for the PDP in 1999. And we've also seen and heard a lot about the role that governors play in different parts of the country. And one important issue that's going to affect or help this administration is really how the narrative and the messaging is in terms of the different levels of responsibility that are both at the national and at the state level. When you now take that into concern, you would expect a much more robust engagement to the way that state governorship elections are conducted. And that's really why it's sad that we didn't have that for most of these particular structures, we didn't have debates between the major candidates, and even go one step further, even debates within the party before the primaries, to ensure that many citizens or many of the voters who are going to be carrying out their rights to nominate or to select their party's candidates will be much more aware of the different proposals being put forward. Now, we're also seeing a case where where much of the narrative of much of the issues are usually just being about putting out different issues, and then in some cases, you do have few candidates that are putting forward ideas and putting forward solutions. But for the most part, the narrative has really just been about whether it should come to this particular part of the state, or whether a particular candidate should be trusted or not. And ultimately, the level of conversation doesn't really bode well, because it doesn't really inspire people to come out that ordinarily might not have been able, or ordinarily would not have engaged with the process. Or even a case where having somebody go back to their state to actually engage and carry out their civic right to vote. So ultimately, it is a very sad state of affairs in noting how this reflects the level of political engagement, but also how many citizens view the political landscape, how this sense of voter apathy is likely to rear its ugly head again during these elections, and how this might mar the voter turnout. So hopefully, what we are also hoping is that many citizens, and not just in terms of the people themselves, parties, civic organizations, and stakeholders, are also very mindful of the fact that there needs to be much more engagement to really ensure a much more robust and a much more active political landscape. One thing that we usually say is that the best time to prepare for the next election was yesterday, and the next best time is today. So it's really about trying to make sure that we can ensure a better and a much more representative democratic landscape.
Well, speak a little bit, again about what the expectations are of INEC. February elections weren't the very best. It's expected that they must have learned from there, but will it be once again heartbreaking to see pretty much the same, experience? I have the same experience with Kogi and Bayelsa and Imo states. And what do you think? Because we spoke with an INEC representative yesterday, and of course they made similar promises about how the body is ready and they have put things in place to ensure that it's a smooth electoral process. But what would you say are the expectations that you have of INEC, and would you also expect? Do you expect that they will be able to meet up with these expectations?
Well, during the off-cycle elections last year in Shun and Ekiti, we actually did report that INEC had made some considerable progress. So also in terms of the use of IREV, in terms of how staff were deployed on the different states, the opening time, the level of engagement, and even importantly, the proactivity in really trying to respond to many of the issues that have been raised. So we really did give INEC some kudos, and I think that many other CSOs and many other organizations actually did the same thing, and that led to an increased level of confidence in the February and March elections, which, as you already rightly pointed out, even though there were some areas of progress, it really did fall short of the expectations that Nigerians had and really should have about the electoral process. Now, the concern, or rather the level of hope, is really just tied to the fact that these are now, smaller elections compared to the millions of registered Nigerians with the February polls. And the hope is that INEC is in a much more stronger position to actively engage and to monitor and to really deliver on the promise. But one thing that is really important to note is that there will be no difference from the February March elections if the lessons learned have not been taken into account. If the glitches that are really marred the presidential or putting of the results on IREV, for example, are not taken into account. If there are no proactive steps to ensure that for many of the areas that have been identified as potential hotspots for the election have not been significantly monitored, and then the presence of security agencies is not improved there. If party agents are often not very mindful of the responsibility that they have in ensuring a much more peace and rancor-free election, not just in terms of their utterances, but also in terms of how they actively engage on the election process. And there are many other dimensions in this process that actually go beyond INEC. For example, the concern about ensuring that there will be a very fair judicial process after the election for those candidates who will likely take the results to court, and also ensuring that for many of the citizens that do come out, that they do feel safe to carry out their civic duty and cast their vote.
Absolutely.
So it goes beyond just INEC in terms of how election is, but then it's really making sure that there's a very strong, lessons learned from the previous elections.
Very true. And, very interestingly, we look at the fact that we just had a new administration sworn in. It will be maybe approximately like 5 months after this current administration. This might also be a way to gauge how people are reacting to the current administration. And by the end of this weekend, or by Saturday, we'll start to see what the expectations are, what the results are. And as we prepare for the other off-cycle elections in the coming year and the year after, I'm hoping that things pan out very smoothly. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Adekaiyaoja. We look forward to having you join us again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.